March 10th, 1941. Hut 8, Bletchley Park, Buckinghamshire, England. Commander Alistair Denniston stood frozen before a machine that looked like an industrial accident, a grotesque marriage of bicycle chains, rotating drums, and electrical relays that clicked and whirred with mechanical determination. The head of the government code and cipher school had spent 3 decades in naval intelligence, had served in Room 40 breaking German codes during the First World War, had recruited the finest linguists and classicists Cambridge and Oxford could provide. He understood cryptanalysis as an art practiced by scholars who knew ancient Greek, who could detect patterns in letter frequencies, who possessed the cultivated intuition that only years of experience with classical texts could provide. What he was witnessing now violated everything he understood about code breaking. Behind the ungainly apparatus sat Alan Turing, a 28-year-old mathematician whose stammering explanations and eccentric mannerisms had initially convinced Denniston the man was unsuited for serious intelligence work. Turing had just handed him a decrypt of German Kriegsmarine communications, messages transmitted that morning from U-boats prowling the North Atlantic. Weather reports, position coordinates, convoy intercept orders. Information that 3 months earlier would have required weeks of manual analysis by teams of cryptanalysts and even then might have remained impenetrable. "How long did this take?" Denniston asked, his voice barely steady. "The bomb ran for approximately 18 minutes before stopping," Turing replied in his characteristic manner, as if describing something utterly mundane. Rather efficient, actually. The logical contradictions eliminated impossible rotor configurations at a rate of roughly 1,000 per hour. Simple mathematical certainty. Simple. The word hung in the air like an obscenity. The Enigma machine, Germany's supposedly unbreakable cipher system, had protected Wehrmacht communications with mathematical complexity so vast that German cryptographers had calculated it would require 150 trillion years to test every possible configuration. The machine offered 150,962, 555, 211, 360,000 possible initial settings, over 158 quintillion combinations that changed daily according to code books distributed across the entire German military. British naval intelligence had been completely blind to German naval communications for nearly a year. U-boats coordinated through encrypted messages were sinking Allied shipping faster than it could be replaced. Britain faced starvation within months. The Battle of the Atlantic, which would determine whether Britain could survive as an independent nation, depended entirely on information that Denniston's best cryptanalysts could not access. Yet this stammering mathematician who chained his coffee mug to the radiator and occasionally wore a gas mask while bicycling had reduced an impossible problem to an 18-minute mechanical calculation. What Denniston couldn't fully comprehend, standing in that cramped hut with its walls covered in mathematical notation he couldn't parse, was that he was witnessing the birth of the modern world. Not just the breaking of a cipher, though that alone would save hundreds of thousands of lives and shorten the war by years, but the transformation of pure mathematical theory into practical machinery. The demonstration that mechanical processes could perform intellectual work faster and more accurately than human minds. The first proof that Alan Turing's abstract concept of a universal computing machine could exist in the physical world as rotating drums and electrical relays. The revolution happening before Denniston's eyes would eventually put computers in every home, would create the internet, would transform human civilization more profoundly than any military victory. But in March 1941, it was simply a machine that could do what German experts had declared mathematically impossible. The mathematics of this achievement were staggering even to describe. The Enigma machine exploited cascading electrical substitution through rotating cipher wheels that created polyalphabetic ciphers of extraordinary complexity. Each keystroke sent electrical current through a plug board that swapped letter pairs, then through 3 or more rotors that rotated at different rates, then reflected through a reversing drum, back through the rotors in reverse, through the plug board again, finally illuminating a lamp showing the encrypted letter. The rotors rotated with each keystroke, the rightmost advancing every time, the middle rotor every 26 keystrokes, the leftmost every 676 keystrokes, creating a cipher that never repeated the same substitution pattern until after 6,900 characters. German cryptographers had tested it exhaustively. The system was mathematically perfect, absolutely unbreakable through any conventional cryptanalytic method. Frequency analysis failed because the polyalphabetic substitution destroyed statistical patterns. Pattern recognition failed because the daily key changes prevented accumulating sufficient ciphertext. Linguistic intuition failed because no amount of classical education could detect structure in mathematical chaos. Every expert who examined Enigma reached the same conclusion. With proper operating procedures, the cipher was invulnerable. Yet Turing had found the vulnerability that German mathematicians missed. Not a weakness in the mathematics, but a weakness in the logic. The Enigma machine, for all its complexity, could never encrypt a letter as itself. The reflector mechanism that allowed the machine to be symmetrical so that the same settings would decrypt messages that it encrypted created an impossible configuration. A could never encode as A, B could never encode as B. This seemed like a minor implementation detail, a trivial quirk of an otherwise perfect machine. Turing recognized it as a catastrophic flaw that made the entire system vulnerable to logical attack. If you knew a phrase that appeared in the encrypted message, what cryptanalysts called a crib, you could test rotor configurations not by trying all 158 quintillion possibilities, but by eliminating configurations that produced logical contradictions. The bomb didn't break Enigma through superhuman calculation. It broke Enigma through relentless mechanical logic that tested thousands of configurations per hour, rejecting contradictions automatically through electrical circuit design, stopping only when it found a configuration that produced no contradictions. By May 1943, Bletchley Park would be decoding over 84,000 Enigma messages monthly, providing Allied commanders with intelligence so comprehensive that German strategic planning was effectively transparent. The transformation from cryptographic darkness to systematic intelligence advantage would save hundreds of thousands of lives, shorten the war by an estimated 2 to 4 years, secure Britain's survival as an independent nation, and establish principles of machine computation that would revolutionize the post-war world. This story is about how mathematical genius defeated mechanical complexity, how a stammering Cambridge mathematician reduced an impossible problem to a simple logical exercise, how theoretical insight became practical machinery, and how one man's understanding of what machines could do transformed what was mathematically certain into what was mechanically inevitable. The code that German experts had declared unbreakable for 150 trillion years would be broken daily, routinely, mechanically, by a machine that clicked and whirred in a wooden hut in the English countryside, turning Hitler's secrets into Allied intelligence as surely as if German commanders were broadcasting their plans in the clear. The revolution had begun long before March 1941, though Denniston didn't know it yet. The roots stretched back through years of failure and frustration, through the desperate evacuation at Dunkirk when British forces abandoned equipment and documents because they couldn't read German communications, warning them of encirclement, through the catastrophic losses in Norway when German forces knew British plans while British commanders operated blind, through the daily agony of watching convoy after convoy disappear beneath Atlantic waters because U-boats coordinated through messages that might as well have been written in an alien language. The transformation from ignorance to insight had required more than mathematical brilliance. It had required captured machines, desperate gambles, Polish cryptanalysts sharing secrets even as their nation fell. naval officers risking their lives to board sinking U-boats before crews could destroy code books, and thousands of hours of patient analysis by teams who worked shifts around the clock testing possibilities until their hands cramped and their eyes burned. But the crucial breakthrough, the insight that made everything else possible, belonged to Alan Turing alone, the recognition that Enigma's complexity was also its vulnerability. That mechanical logic could exploit what human intuition could not detect, that the age of thinking machines had arrived whether anyone was ready for it or not. The strategic mathematics were brutal and unforgiving. In 1940 alone, German U-boats had sunk over 1,000 Allied merchant ships, totaling 4 million tons of shipping. The rate was accelerating. By early 1941, U-boats were destroying vessels faster than British and American shipyards could replace them. Britain imported 68 million tons of supplies annually in peacetime. By 1941, imports had fallen to 31 million tons, and the trend continued downward. Food rationing had tightened to starvation levels. Strategic reserves of fuel, ammunition, and industrial materials were measured in weeks rather than months. Winston Churchill would later write that the only thing that truly frightened him during the entire war was the U-boat peril. The mathematics was simple and terrifying. If the rate of sinking continued, Britain would be forced to negotiate surrender by autumn 1941. The entire outcome of the war, the survival of democracy in Europe, the fate of millions under Nazi occupation, depended on breaking a cipher that every expert had declared mathematically unbreakable. The origins of Britain's cryptographic desperation stretched back to September 4, 1939, the day after Britain declared war on Germany. That morning, the Government Code and Cipher School, known by the cryptonym GC&CS, completed its emergency relocation from London to Bletchley Park, a Victorian mansion 50 miles northwest in Buckinghamshire. Commander Alistair Denniston, who had led Room 40's successful code-breaking operations against Imperial Germany during the First World War, understood that this conflict would be different. In 1914, German naval communications had used relatively simple code books that could be reconstructed through patient analysis of intercepted traffic. By 1939, Germany had mechanized its cryptography. The Enigma machine, adopted by all branches of the Wehrmacht in the 1920s and continuously improved throughout the 1930s, represented cryptographic sophistication that made Great War methods obsolete. British military intelligence had known about Enigma since the late 1920s. Hugh Foss and Dilly Knox, two of Britain's most accomplished cryptanalysts, had obtained a commercial version of the machine and studied its operation extensively. Their analysis had been professionally thorough and strategically wrong. They concluded that the military version, while more complex than the commercial model, could eventually be broken using traditional cryptanalytic methods. Frequency analysis, pattern recognition, and intuition developed through decades of experience with classical ciphers. This assessment proved catastrophically optimistic. When war began, and Y stations, Britain's network of radio interception posts, started collecting German military traffic, the messages were completely impenetrable. The polyalphabetic substitution that Enigma created destroyed all statistical patterns. The daily key changes prevented accumulating sufficient cipher text for analysis. The sheer size of the key space made brute force attempts absurd. British cryptanalysts, armed with centuries of experience breaking diplomatic codes and naval ciphers, found themselves utterly helpless against a mechanical system that operated by mathematical rules rather than human patterns. The first breakthrough had not come from Britain, but from Poland. In 1932, the Polish Cipher Bureau, acutely aware that Poland stood between two hostile powers and possessed no geographical defenses, had made breaking Enigma a national priority. Polish military intelligence recruited mathematicians rather than linguists, recognizing that Enigma was a mathematical problem rather than a linguistic one. Marian Rejewski, a 27-year-old mathematician from Poznan University, approached Enigma not as a coded message to be read, but as a permutation problem to be solved. Working with limited information, a commercial Enigma machine purchased in Berlin, and documents provided by French intelligence from a German traitor, Rejewski used group theory and permutation analysis to reconstruct the rotor wirings of the military Enigma. By 1933, Poland was reading German communications. For 7 years, from 1933 to 1940, Poland maintained this advantage through a combination of mathematical brilliance and mechanical innovation. Rejewski and his colleagues Jerzy Różycki and Henryk Zygalski designed electromechanical devices called bomby, the conceptual predecessors to Turing's later bombe, that automated the search for daily keys. Polish cryptanalysts read Wehrmacht communications throughout the mid-1930s, monitoring German rearmament and military planning with intelligence precision that should have warned Europe of coming catastrophe. But Polish success rested on specific German operational procedures that were vulnerable to mathematical attack. When those procedures changed, the Polish advantage evaporated. In December 1938, the Wehrmacht increased the number of available rotors from 3 to 5, requiring operators to select 3 rotors daily from the larger set. This change multiplied possible rotor orders from 6 to 60, increasing the search space by a factor of 10. Polish methods, which had worked brilliantly when searching among 6 rotor arrangements, became impractical when forced to search among 60. The Polish Cipher Bureau could still break German Army and Luftwaffe messages, but the process now required days rather than hours, reducing intelligence value to near zero. Worse was coming. On July 25, 1939, with war obviously imminent and Poland facing certain defeat against German military superiority, Polish intelligence made an extraordinary decision. They invited British and French cryptanalysts to Warsaw and shared everything: the reconstructed rotor wirings, the daily key recovery methods, the bomby machines, 7 years of techniques and insights. Alistair Denniston and Dilly Knox traveled to Warsaw and returned to London with information that would have taken Britain years to develop independently. This Polish generosity, this willingness to share national secrets even as their country faced annihilation, gave Britain a foundation on which to build. But it was not enough. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. On September 3rd, Britain declared war. On May 1st, 1940, the Kriegsmarine implemented new operational procedures for its naval Enigma that rendered Polish methods completely ineffective. The German Navy, unlike the Army and Luftwaffe, had always been more security-conscious about communications. Naval Enigma used different rotors, a more complex indicator system for message keys, and operational procedures designed specifically to defeat the types of attacks that had worked against Army traffic. When German naval operators began using these enhanced procedures systematically in May 1940, British cryptanalysts found themselves facing a cipher that was effectively unbreakable using any method they possessed. The strategic timing could not have been worse. May 1940 was the month of Dunkirk, when British forces evacuated from France in desperate chaos. It was the month France fell and Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany. It was the month when the Battle of the Atlantic began in earnest, when Admiral Karl Dönitz's U-boat fleet started implementing wolf-pack tactics that would bring Britain to the edge of starvation. And it was the month when British cryptanalysts, who had made modest progress against Army and Luftwaffe Enigma using Polish techniques, discovered that naval Enigma was an entirely different problem. The messages that mattered most, the U-boat position reports and convoy intercept orders that determined whether Britain would survive or starve, were completely opaque. Commander Denniston faced this reality with professional calm that concealed institutional panic. GCNCS employed approximately 200 people when war began. Most were linguists, classicists, and career civil servants who understood cryptanalysis as an extension of classical scholarship. They could reconstruct diplomatic codes through patient analysis. They could break simple substitution ciphers using frequency analysis. They could exploit linguistic patterns in enemy communications. What they could not do was break a polyalphabetic machine cipher that destroyed all linguistic patterns and changed its configuration daily according to mathematical rules. Denniston recognized that solving this problem would require different expertise. In September 1939, he began recruiting mathematicians from Cambridge and Oxford, scholars whose understanding of abstract mathematics might provide insights that classical cryptanalysis could not. Among those recruits was Alan Matheson Turing, who arrived at Bletchley Park on September 4, 1939, less than 24 hours after Britain declared war. At 27 years old, Turing was already recognized within the small community of mathematical logicians as an exceptional intellect. His 1936 paper on computable numbers, published in the Proceedings of the London Mathematical Society, had revolutionized the field by proving that certain mathematical problems were fundamentally unsolvable by any mechanical process. More significantly for Bletchley Park's needs, the paper had introduced an abstract construct called a universal computing machine, a theoretical device that could simulate any other computing machine given appropriate instructions. This concept, which would eventually become the foundation of computer science, suggested that Turing understood mechanical processes in ways that few other mathematicians did. But Turing's brilliance came wrapped in eccentricities that made many of his colleagues uncomfortable. He stammered when speaking, particularly when excited about an idea. He chained his coffee mug to the radiator in his office to prevent theft, though no one else wanted his battered mug. He occasionally wore a gas mask while bicycling to Bletchley Park, claiming it helped with his hay fever. His social awkwardness was legendary. His ability to explain complex mathematical ideas to non-mathematicians was nearly non-existent. Commander Denniston, who valued polish and professionalism, initially questioned whether this odd young mathematician would contribute anything useful to the war effort. That assessment would prove to be among the most mistaken evaluations in military history. Turing's assignment was straightforward: break German naval Enigma. The task seemed impossible for reasons both mathematical and operational. The naval Enigma used 4 rotors instead of 3, multiplying the search space by a factor of 26. It employed 8 rotors total, from which 4 were selected daily, increasing rotor order combinations from 60 to 1,680. The indicator system, which told receiving operators how to set their machines to decrypt messages, was far more complex than the Army version. Most critically, German naval operators followed rigid security procedures. They avoided predictable message formats. They used random message keys. They transmitted in short bursts to avoid direction finding. Everything about naval Enigma was designed to defeat exactly the types of attacks that had worked against less secure German systems. Turing approached the problem not as an experienced cryptanalyst would, because he had no experience with practical code breaking, but as a mathematician approaching a logical puzzle. His fundamental insight was recognizing that Enigma's security came from complexity, not from mathematical soundness. The machine was complicated, but complication was not the same as cryptographic strength. If the system contained any structural vulnerability, any logical weakness that could be exploited systematically, then the apparent security provided by 158 quintillion possible configurations was illusory. Turing believed such a vulnerability existed. He just needed to find it. The first clue came from the machine's design itself. Enigma was symmetrical, meaning the same rotor settings would both encrypt and decrypt messages. An operator would type plain text, and lamps would illuminate showing ciphertext. Another operator with identical rotor settings would type that ciphertext, and lamps would illuminate showing the original plain text. This symmetry, which made the machine practical for field use by eliminating the need for separate encryption and decryption modes, required a reflector drum that sent electrical current back through the rotors in reverse. The reflector created an absolute rule. No letter could ever encrypt as itself. If plain text was A, the ciphertext could be any letter except A. This seemed like a trivial implementation detail. Turing recognized it as the flaw that would destroy Enigma's security. Segment 1. The flaw that German engineers never saw. The vulnerability that would destroy Enigma's security was hiding in plain sight, visible to anyone who understood the machine's operation, yet invisible to the engineers who built it and the cryptographers who evaluated it. The reflector drum, which made Enigma symmetrical and therefore practical for field use, created an absolute mathematical constraint. No letter could ever encrypt as itself. This seemed trivial. The Wehrmacht had tested Enigma exhaustively. In 1926, when the German Navy first evaluated the machine for adoption, Korvettenkapitän Konrad Albrecht conducted comprehensive security analysis. His report, captured by Allied forces in 1945 and declassified in 1996, revealed the German assessment. The inability of the machine to encrypt any letter as itself is an inherent property of the reflector design. This property has no bearing on security. An attacker without knowledge of daily keys faces 158 quintillion possible configurations. Whether one configuration is eliminated as impossible is cryptographically irrelevant. Albrecht was correct that eliminating one configuration from 158 quintillion made no practical difference. But he missed the deeper implication. The reflector created not one impossible configuration, but a relationship that applied to every letter in every message. If you knew that a message contained certain words, what Turing called cribs, you could test whether a proposed rotor configuration would produce those words from the encrypted text. Most configurations would fail immediately because they would require some letter to encrypt as itself, which was impossible. Turing recognized that this simple constraint transformed an impossible problem into a solvable one. The concept of cribs was not new to cryptanalysis. Code breakers had used probable plaintext for centuries. What was revolutionary was Turing's recognition that cribs could be exploited mechanically through logical testing rather than linguistic analysis. If you suspected a weather report began with wetter and you had the encrypted text, you could test rotor configurations by checking whether they produced logical contradictions. A configuration that required W to encrypt as W was wrong and could be eliminated immediately without further analysis. A configuration that passed the contradiction test deserved deeper investigation. This insight required understanding Enigma not as German operators understood it, as a tool for encrypting messages, but as a mathematical structure with logical properties that could be exploited. Gordon Welchman, the Cambridge mathematician who worked alongside Turing and contributed crucial improvements to the bomb design, explained this distinction in his 1982 memoir. Traditional cryptanalysts approached Enigma as if it were a German language problem. They looked for German military terminology, for linguistic patterns, for the kinds of errors human operators might make. Alan approached it as a logic problem. He wasn't trying to read German. He was trying to find contradictions in the mathematics. The reflector created those contradictions. The bomb exploited them systematically. Segment 2. Polish genius versus German overconfidence. The first systematic break of Enigma had come not from Britain's established code breakers, but from 3 young Polish mathematicians working under conditions of desperate national urgency. Poland in 1932 faced an existential threat. Positioned between Soviet Russia and a rearming Germany, lacking natural geographical defenses, Poland's survival depended on intelligence. The Polish Cipher Bureau made breaking Enigma a national priority and recruited mathematicians from Polish universities to solve the problem. Marian Rejewski, assigned to Enigma in October 1932 at age 27, approached the challenge with mathematical tools that traditional cryptanalysts didn't possess. He used group theory to analyze the permutations that Enigma's rotors created. He applied algebraic techniques to reconstruct rotor wirings from intercepted traffic. Most importantly, he recognized that German operators followed predictable procedures that created mathematical relationships that could be exploited. German operators were supposed to choose random three-letter message keys for each transmission. In practice, many operators used patterns, A, then BBB, then CCC, or they typed three keys next to each other on the keyboard, QWE, ASD, ZCC. These human failures in random key generation created the patterns Rajkowski needed. By January 1933, Rajkowski had reconstructed the rotor wirings without ever seeing a military Enigma machine. By September 1938, the Polish Cipher Bureau was reading German communications systematically using electromechanical bombing that automated the key recovery process. For 7 years, Poland possessed intelligence advantage that should have changed history. Polish intelligence monitored German rearmament, military planning, and strategic intentions. They passed intelligence to French and British liaison officers. Yet Western powers dismissed Polish warnings, unable to believe that mathematicians from a minor power had solved a problem that British and French experts considered insoluble. The German response to inexplicable security failures during the late 1930s revealed the danger of overconfidence in technological systems. Several incidents should have warned Wehrmacht cryptographers that Enigma was compromised. In 1938, Polish intelligence provided information about German troop dispositions near the Czech border that could only have come from decrypted communications. German security investigations attributed the leak to human espionage, never considering that their encryption system might be vulnerable. Oberst Wilhelm Fenner, chief of Wehrmacht Communications Security, conducted a comprehensive review of Enigma in June 1939. His classified report concluded, "The Enigma system remains cryptographically secure. Recent security breaches reflect inadequate key management and operator errors, not systematic cryptanalysis. No foreign power possesses the mathematical capability to attack our cipher." This assessment was simultaneously correct and catastrophically wrong. Fenner was right that no foreign power except Poland possessed the capability. He was wrong in assuming Poland didn't qualify as a serious cryptographic threat. More fundamentally, he was wrong in believing that mathematical capability determined cryptographic success. What mattered was not capability in abstract terms, but whether anyone had actually solved the problem. Poland had. Britain would. Germany never suspected either achievement until after the war ended. Segment 3. The machine that thought faster than humans. Turing's bomb represented a radical departure from how cryptanalysis had been practiced for millennia. Traditional code breaking was fundamentally a human intellectual activity. Cryptanalysts studied messages, detected patterns, made intuitive leaps, tested hypotheses, and gradually reconstructed codes through insight and experience. The bomb eliminated human insight from most of the process. It tested logical consistency mechanically, at speeds no human could match, using electrical circuits that embodied mathematical logic in physical form. The first bomb, completed in March 1940 and named Victory, was primitive and partially ineffective. It could test rotor configurations but required several minutes per test and produced many false stops that required human analysis. Turing returned to his calculations, refining the logical principles, working with engineer Harold Keane at the British Tabulating Machine Company to improve mechanical reliability and speed. The breakthrough came when Gordon Welchman proposed adding a diagonal board that exploited the plug board permutations. This addition, which Turing immediately recognized as brilliant, reduced false stops dramatically and accelerated the testing process. The improved bombs, entering service in August 1940, were industrial artifact that embodied abstract mathematics in rotating drums and electrical relays. Each machine weighed over 1 ton, stood 7 feet tall, and contained 108 drums arranged in 36 banks of 3. Each drum simulated one Enigma rotor in one of 26 positions. When a crib was fed into the machine along with corresponding ciphertext, electrical current would flow through the drums, testing logical consistency. Contradictions would break the circuit. Consistent configurations would allow current to flow and trigger a stop. The clicking and whirring of 108 drums, rotating simultaneously at high speed, created a distinctive sound that Bletchley Park personnel found either hypnotic or maddening depending on their proximity and shift length. Joan Clark, one of the few female cryptanalysts working in Hut 8, and Turing's close friend who was briefly engaged to him before he revealed his homosexuality, described the experience of operating bombs during a 1992 interview recorded by the Imperial War Museum. You would set up the machine according to the menu, which was the configuration Turing's team had calculated based on the crib and the encrypted text. Then you would start the drums rotating and wait. Sometimes it would run for hours without stopping. Sometimes it would stop within minutes. When it stopped, your heart would race. Was this the real solution or a false stop? You would test it manually using an Enigma machine we kept for that purpose. Most stops were false. Just electrical flukes. But when you found the real one, when you typed the ciphertext into the checking machine and saw German words emerging, the satisfaction was extraordinary. You had broken today's key. Every message transmitted on that network was now readable. The psychological transformation that operating bombs created among the women recruited to Bletchley Park was profound and largely unrecognized. Most were members of the Women's Royal Naval Service, WRNs nicknamed Wrens, recruited because authorities believed women would be more patient with tedious mechanical operations. What authorities failed to anticipate was that these women were not merely machine operators, but participants in intellectual warfare. They understood that their work directly affected whether convoys reached Britain safely, whether U-boats were sunk before attacking, whether the war would be won or lost. This knowledge, combined with absolute secrecy about their actual duties, created psychological burdens that many carried for decades. Segment 4. Cribs, Silis, and the Human Errors that Betrayed Germany. The mathematical vulnerability that made Enigma theoretically breakable was necessary, but not sufficient for systematic decryption. Without cribs, without probable plain text to test against encrypted messages, the bomb was useless. The extraordinary reality was that German operators provided cribs constantly through predictable behavior and procedural laziness that made systematic exploitation possible. Weather reports were the most reliable source. Every morning, German weather stations transmitted encrypted reports following standardized formats. Wetter, weather, appeared at predictable positions. Temperature and pressure readings followed standard meteorological terminology. Naval grid coordinates used known formats. British meteorologists could often predict roughly what German weather reports would say based on conditions visible from British coast, providing probable plaintext that could be tested against intercepted messages. Even more valuable were what Bletchley Park personnel called Silis, a term coined by cryptanalyst Leslie Yoxall from the German word for eyelashes, because they appeared as little marks in the traffic analysis. Silis occurred when German operators chose message keys following patterns rather than randomly. An operator who used his girlfriend's initials, who typed 3 adjacent keys like QWE or ASD, who used the same key repeatedly until his superior noticed and reprimanded him, created relationships that could be exploited mathematically. One particularly lazy German operator assigned to a weather station in North Africa transmitted every report using the same message key, BLU, apparently short for his girlfriend Berbel. This single operator's laziness provided cribs that helped break Enigma for the entire African theater. Dilly Knox, one of Bletchley Park's most accomplished traditional cryptanalysts who had served in Room 40 during the First World War, specialized in exploiting operator errors. His techniques combined classical cryptanalytic intuition with understanding of German military procedures. Knox would study intercepted traffic, looking for patterns that suggested operator laziness or procedural shortcuts. When he found them, he would construct probable plaintext that could be tested using the bomb. His work was crucial in breaking Italian naval Enigma in 1941, which used the same machine as German naval Enigma, but with even sloppier operating procedures. The contrast between German cryptographic theory and operational reality was stark. German cryptographers had designed Enigma to be secure if operators followed proper procedures. Choose random message keys, avoid predictable message formats, change keys frequently, never reuse indicators. In theory, perfect operational security would make Enigma unbreakable, even with the structural vulnerabilities Turing exploited. In practice, operators were human. They were tired, bored, rushed, lazy, and creative in ways that security procedures never anticipated. Hauptmann Ludwig Stummel, a German signals officer captured in North Africa, 1943, was interrogated about Enigma procedures at the Combined Services Detailed Interrogation Center. His testimony, preserved in British archives, revealed the gap between German theory and practice. "We were trained that security depends on following procedures exactly. Random key generation, no repeated patterns, no predictable message formats. But in combat, under artillery fire, with radio operators working 18-hour shifts, procedures became suggestions rather than requirements. Operators used whatever keys came to mind. Weather stations transmitted in the same format daily because meteorologists aren't creative writers. Supply requests followed standard templates because efficiency required standardization. We trusted that the machine protected us regardless of how we used it. That trust was apparently misplaced." Segment 5. The capture that changed everything. U-110 and the breakthrough. Despite Turing's mathematical insights and the bomb's mechanical efficiency, breaking naval Enigma remained impossible without one crucial element: captured code books and rotor settings. The 4-rotor naval Enigma used 8 rotors total, from which 4 were selected daily, creating 1,680 possible rotor orders, compared to 60 for the 3-rotor Army version. Without knowing which 4 rotors were in use and their initial positions, finding the daily key required testing astronomical numbers of possibilities even with the bomb. The breakthrough came not from mathematical brilliance, but from desperate courage on May 9, 1941. HMS Bulldog, a British destroyer, depth-charged U-110 commanded by Captain Lieutenant Fritz Julius Lemp in the North Atlantic. The U-boat surfaced, damaged but intact. Lemp ordered his crew to abandon ship and set scuttling charges. But Royal Navy boarding parties under Sub-Lieutenant David Baum reached U-110 before it sank. What they found in the radio room changed the war. Baum, who had never seen an Enigma machine and had no idea why he'd been ordered to capture any encryption equipment, gathered everything he could carry. The Enigma machine itself, code books listing current rotor settings, bigram tables used for encoding grid coordinates, short weather cipher books used for encrypting weather reports, and message logs showing recent traffic. The haul was comprehensive enough that when the materials reached Bletchley Park on May 13th, cryptanalysts possessed everything needed to read German naval traffic immediately. The intelligence windfall was extraordinary, but also temporary. Captured materials revealed current settings, but those settings changed daily according to schedules in the code books. Once the schedules expired, usually after a month, Bletchley Park would be blind again unless they could exploit the captured information to break subsequent keys. This is where Turing's bombs proved crucial. The captured materials allowed cryptanalysts to read traffic and identify cribs, standard phrases, and formats that appeared consistently. These cribs could then be used against future traffic after the captured settings expired, maintaining continuity of intelligence. Commander Ian Fleming, serving as personal assistant to the Director of Naval Intelligence and later famous as creator of James Bond, proposed even more aggressive capture operations. In August 1940, Fleming drafted what became known as Operation Ruthless, a plan to crash-land a captured German bomber in the English Channel near a German rescue vessel, then seize the vessel and its Enigma materials. The operation was never executed, deemed too risky and uncertain. But the concept revealed how desperately British intelligence needed captured materials to supplement mathematical attacks. The most valuable capture came in October 1942 when HMS Petard depth-charged U-559 in the Mediterranean. As the U-boat sank, two British sailors, Lieutenant Tony Fasson and able seaman Colin Grazier, entered the sinking vessel to retrieve documents. They passed Enigma materials to a third sailor before the submarine sank, drowning both men. Their sacrifice was recognized with posthumous George Crosses. More importantly for the war effort, the materials they died retrieving included code books for the new four-rotor Atlantic Enigma that had blacked out U-boat intelligence since February 1942. Within weeks of receiving these materials, Bletchley Park resumed reading Atlantic U-boat traffic, restoring intelligence that immediately reduced convoy losses. Segment 6. The strategic impact from intelligence to victory. The transformation from decrypted messages to strategic advantage required more than cryptanalysis. It required institutional structures to analyze intelligence, disseminate it to commanders who could exploit it, and maintain security so rigorous that Germans never suspected their communications were compromised. This system, codenamed Ultra, became arguably Britain's most important military asset. The intelligence product from Enigma decrypts was staggering in volume and strategic significance. By mid-1943, Bletchley Park was decoding over 84,000 German messages monthly across all Enigma networks: Army, Air Force, Navy, SS, police, railway, and various specialized services. This provided Allied commanders with intelligence so comprehensive that German military planning was effectively transparent. Army order of battle, unit locations, supply status, operational orders, strategic intentions, all were revealed through intercepted and decrypted communications. The Battle of the Atlantic demonstrated Ultra's impact most dramatically. Admiral Karl Dönitz coordinated U-boat wolf packs through encrypted radio transmissions. Submarines would patrol areas, report convoy sightings, then concentrate for coordinated attacks. This system depended entirely on secure communications. Break the security, and Wolfpack coordination collapsed. Between March 1941, when Bletchley Park first broke naval Enigma consistently, and February 1942, when Germany introduced four-rotor Enigma and created a temporary blackout, convoy losses dropped by 50%. When four-rotor Enigma was finally broken in December 1942, losses dropped again. By May 1943, U-boat losses had become unsustainable, forcing Dönitz to withdraw from the North Atlantic. Patrick Beasley, serving in the Operational Intelligence Center at the Admiralty, which received ultra-intelligence and used it to route convoys, described the transformation in his 1977 memoir, Very Special Intelligence. Before Ultra, routing convoys was educated guesswork based on radio direction finding and pattern analysis. After Ultra, we often knew more about U-boat positions than German admirals did. We could read their patrol orders, their position reports, their fuel status, their attack plans. We routed convoys around U-boat picket lines. When avoidance was impossible, we positioned escort groups to intercept submarines before they could attack. The Germans never understood why their tactics suddenly stopped working. They suspected better radar, more aircraft, improved direction finding. They never imagined we were reading their mail. The security procedures protecting Ultra were paranoid by necessity. Churchill personally controlled distribution, often withholding intelligence from field commanders if using it might reveal the source. Only the highest commanders received Ultra material, delivered via special liaison units. Recipients were forbidden from acting on Ultra intelligence without establishing plausible alternative sources. Reconnaissance flights would be sent to discover information already known through decrypts. Captured documents would be fabricated to explain tactical successes. Double agents would report fictional intelligence that accounted for British knowledge. The most controversial Ultra decisions involved allowing attacks to proceed when warnings might reveal the intelligence source. In November 1940, Ultra revealed that the Luftwaffe would bomb Coventry. Churchill faced an agonizing choice: warn the city and risk compromising Ultra, or allow the attack to proceed. He chose the latter. Coventry was devastated. Over 500 people died. The decision was militarily sound, but morally agonizing. Similar calculations occurred throughout the war, with acceptable casualty rates for protecting Ultra never explicitly quantified, but implicitly understood by commanders authorized to receive the intelligence. Segment 7. Complexity versus simplicity. The engineering paradox. The Enigma machine represented sophisticated German engineering at its finest. Precise manufacturing, elegant mechanical design, electrical ingenuity combined into a portable encryption device that could operate under battlefield conditions. The bomb, by contrast, was an ungainly industrial artifact that looked like it had been assembled from bicycle parts and electrical switches. Yet the crude machine defeated the elegant one, demonstrating a fundamental truth about the relationship between complexity and security. German engineers had made Enigma progressively more complex throughout the 1930s, believing that additional complexity enhanced security. They added rotors, increasing from 3 to 5 available for Army use and 8 for Navy. They increased plugboard cables from 6 to 10. They introduced special rotors that stepped irregularly. Each modification made the machine more complicated and more difficult to operate. Each modification also made the machine more vulnerable to mechanical failure, operator error, and procedural shortcuts that created exploitable patterns. Turing's approach was fundamentally different. He didn't make the bomb complex to match Enigma's complexity. He made it single-purpose and relentless. The bomb had one job: test logical consistency of proposed rotor configurations against known cribs. It performed that job mechanically, without intelligence or intuition, simply eliminating contradictions through electrical circuit design. The engineering philosophy was closer to an industrial stamping machine than to precision instrumentation. Harold Keane, the British tabulating machine company engineer who translated Turing's mathematical logic into physical machinery, described the design philosophy in a post-war interview preserved at the Imperial War Museum. Dr. Turing would explain what he needed the machine to test logically. I would figure out how to make electrical circuits and rotating drums perform those tests mechanically. We weren't trying to build elegant equipment. We were trying to build equipment that worked reliably under continuous operation. The bombs were loud, hot, required constant maintenance, and looked like industrial disasters. But they tested 1,000 rotor configurations per hour, with mechanical reliability that German precision engineering couldn't match in actual combat conditions. This contrast between German complexity and British simplicity extended to operational reliability. Enigma machines required careful maintenance, precise rotor alignment, and proper electrical contact to function correctly. Under ideal conditions in headquarters facilities, they were reliable. Under combat conditions, with dust, moisture, temperature extremes, and rough handling, they failed regularly. German signals units carried spare rotors, replacement plugboard cables, and trained technicians to repair machines. Despite these precautions, mechanical failures created situations where operators transmitted messages in lower security backup codes or plain text, providing Bletchley Park with cribs that could be used against properly encrypted traffic. The bombs, conversely, were designed for continuous industrial operation. They ran 24 hours daily, stopped only for maintenance, and were repaired quickly using standardized components. By 1943, Bletchley Park operated over 50 bombs, with additional machines at outstations. This industrial-scale approach, treating code breaking as manufacturing rather than as scholarly pursuit, represented a conceptual revolution as important as Turing's mathematical insights. Segment 8. The human cost of secrecy. The psychological burden of maintaining ultra-security fell heavily on the thousands of people who worked at Bletchley Park and knew that every conversation outside secure facilities risked betraying secrets that protected thousands of lives. They worked under conditions of absolute secrecy, unable to share their wartime experiences even with family, bound by the Official Secrets Act to silence that many maintained for decades after the war ended. The women recruited to operate bombs, translate decrypts, and staff the administrative functions that kept Bletchley Park operating faced particular difficulties. Most were young, recruited directly from school or university, thrust into work of strategic importance without clear understanding of why their tasks mattered. They worked 8-hour shifts rotating around the clock, monitoring machines or analyzing traffic, returning to dormitories in Bletchley Town where landladies had no idea what their lodgers actually did. Mavis Lever, recruited to Bletchley Park at age 19 and assigned to Dilly Knox's research section working on Italian naval Enigma, described the isolation in a 1998 interview. "I was doing work that I was told was crucial to the war effort. I was breaking codes that led to Italian warships being sunk, but I couldn't tell anyone. My mother thought I was filing papers. My friends from university thought I'd taken some boring government job." The disconnection between secret reality and public identity created stress that I didn't fully process for decades. We were winning battles, saving lives, shortening the war, and we had to pretend we spent our days doing clerical work. The Official Secrets Act, which bound all Bletchley Park personnel to silence about their wartime work, created peculiar post-war difficulties. Veterans couldn't explain to employers what they had actually done during the war. Women who had operated bombs or broken codes had to list their wartime service as clerical work on job applications. Men who had performed complex mathematical analysis couldn't cite their achievements when applying to universities. Some found employers skeptical that they had done anything important. Others found that vague job descriptions from government intelligence services created suspicion that they had been involved in activities best not inquired about. Not until the 1970s, when the British government began declassifying World War II intelligence records, could Bletchley Park veterans speak openly about their work. By then, many had carried their secrets for over 30 years. Some found relief in finally being able to explain what they had done. Others found that 3 decades of enforced silence had made discussing the experiences difficult. Still others discovered that post-war Britain was uninterested in wartime achievements that had been hidden for so long. The most profound tragedy was Alan Turing's fate. In 1952, Turing was convicted of gross indecency for homosexual activities, which remained illegal in Britain until 1967. Rather than face imprisonment, he accepted chemical castration through hormone treatments. The persecution of the man who had contributed more to Allied victory than most generals reflected the profound injustice of contemporary attitudes toward homosexuality. On June 7, 1954, Turing died from cyanide poisoning. The coroner ruled it suicide, though some historians have questioned this conclusion. He was 41 years old. Turing's contributions remained classified at the time of his death. His family, his friends, and the public knew only that he was a mathematician who had worked for the government during the war. The full story of his achievements, his crucial role in breaking Enigma, his invention of the bomb, his foundational contributions to computer science, remained hidden behind official secrecy for 2 more decades. When the story finally emerged in the 1970s and 1980s, Britain confronted the uncomfortable reality that it had persecuted and destroyed one of the men who had saved the nation. Segment 9. German Blind Spots. Why they never knew the most remarkable aspect of ultra-intelligence was that Germany never discovered systematic Enigma compromise despite numerous indicators that should have triggered investigation. German cryptographers conducted periodic security reviews. They investigated situations where Allied forces demonstrated inexplicable knowledge of German plans. Every investigation concluded that Enigma remained secure, attributing intelligence leaks to espionage, captured documents, or superior Allied technical capabilities like radar and direction finding. This failure of imagination reflected several interconnected factors. First, German cryptographers had such confidence in Enigma's mathematical security that they couldn't imagine systematic cryptanalysis succeeding. Second, they underestimated Allied cryptographic capabilities, assuming that only German mathematicians possessed sufficient sophistication to attack modern cipher systems. Third, Allied deception operations provided plausible alternative explanations for intelligence successes that made Enigma compromise seem unnecessary as an explanation. Wilhelm Tranow, a German cryptographer who conducted security analysis for the Wehrmacht signal staff, was interrogated after the war about Enigma security reviews. His testimony, preserved in Allied intelligence archives, revealed German reasoning. We knew that breaking Enigma required 3 things: captured machines, which we knew the Allies had from sunken U-boats, knowledge of rotor wirings, which we assumed they had reconstructed, and daily key settings, which changed every 24 hours according to code books. We calculated that even with machines and wirings, finding daily keys required testing astronomical numbers of possibilities. We assessed this as mathematically impossible given known computing capabilities. When we investigated situations suggesting intelligence compromise, we found plausible explanations. Captured documents, direction finding, radar detection, agent networks. We never found evidence of systematic cryptanalysis because we were looking for evidence that matched our assumptions about what was possible. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commanding the U-boat fleet and later becoming commander-in-chief of the German Navy, was particularly concerned about communication security. He ordered repeated investigations into whether Allied forces were reading U-boat communications. Each investigation concluded the same: Enigma was secure. Allied successes reflected superior radar and direction-finding capabilities. Dönitz's post-war memoir, published in 1958, revealed his continued belief that Enigma had remained secure. The Allies possessed technical capabilities that we had not anticipated. Their radar could detect surfaced U-boats at night. Their direction finding could locate submarines transmitting position reports. Their aircraft coverage was more extensive than we calculated. But we maintained confidence in our encryption throughout the war. Not until years after the war ended did I learn that the British had been reading our communications. That knowledge was devastating. Thousands of my sailors died because I trusted a machine that had failed us. This German failure to detect Enigma compromise extended even to situations where the evidence was overwhelming. In several cases, Allied forces attacked German positions or intercepted German vessels within hours of encrypted orders being transmitted. German security investigators attributed these coincidences to radio direction finding or agent networks, never considering systematic decrypt capability. The cognitive bias was powerful. German cryptographers believed Enigma was unbreakable, therefore it must be unbreakable, therefore Allied intelligence must come from other sources. Segment 10. the birth of the computing age. The bomb was not a computer in the modern sense. It could not be programmed for different tasks. It could not store data electronically. It could not perform general arithmetic. But it embodied the crucial principle that would make modern computing possible, that mechanical processes could perform logical operations faster and more accurately than human minds. This principle, which Turing had explored theoretically in his 1936 paper on computable numbers, was now demonstrated practically in a machine that could defeat Nazi cryptography. Turing's wartime work influenced his post-war career directly. In 1945, he joined the National Physical Laboratory to design the automatic computing engine, AC, one of the first stored program electronic computers. His design incorporated lessons learned from the bomb, that complex calculations could be broken into simple, logical operations performed sequentially, that machine operations could be controlled through programming rather than physical reconfiguration, and that electronic components could perform calculations faster than electromechanical devices. Though institutional obstacles prevented ACE from being built to Turing's original specifications, the principles influenced computer development worldwide. The Manchester Mark I, built at Manchester University, where Turing worked from 1948 until his death, was among the first computers to execute stored programs. The EDVAC and UNIVAC computers developed in America incorporated similar concepts. The entire field of computer science emerged from the recognition that machines could perform intellectual work that had previously required human intelligence. Turing's theoretical work on artificial intelligence established the philosophical framework for machine intelligence that remains central to computer science. His 1950 paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, proposing what became known as the Turing test for machine intelligence, asked the fundamental question, can machines think? The question emerged directly from practical experience with machines that performed intellectual tasks during the war. If the bomb could think through logical possibilities faster than human analysts, what other intellectual tasks might machines perform? Tommy Flowers, the post office engineer who designed Colossus, the electronic computer built at Bletchley Park in 1943 to break the German Lorenz cipher used for high-level strategic communications, understood that wartime computing represented a revolution. We built machines during the war that could perform calculations faster than any human. We did it because we needed to break codes before the intelligence became stale. But the implications extended far beyond cryptanalysis. If machines could break codes, they could perform any logical operation. If they could perform logical operations, they could simulate intelligence. We had created the foundation for a new world where machines would augment human capability in ways we were only beginning to imagine. The post-war development of computing technology followed directly from wartime cryptanalysis. Many of the engineers and mathematicians who built the first computers had worked at Bletchley Park or in American cryptographic facilities. They understood that machines could perform intellectual work. They had seen mechanical logic defeat human secrecy. They knew that the age of thinking machines had arrived. The final accounting of Ultra's contribution to Allied victory resists precise quantification but admits no doubt about strategic significance. Eisenhower stated after the war that Ultra shortened the conflict by at least 2 years. Churchill described Ultra personnel as the geese that laid the golden eggs and never cackled. British official, historians calculated that breaking Enigma saved hundreds of thousands of Allied lives through better convoy routing, tactical intelligence, and operational planning informed by comprehensive knowledge of enemy intentions. The statistical evidence supports these assessments. In the Battle of the Atlantic, convoy losses dropped by approximately 50% during periods when naval Enigma was being read consistently compared to blackout periods when it could not be broken. U-boat losses increased correspondingly, rising from sustainable attrition rates to catastrophic losses that forced withdrawal from the North Atlantic in May 1943. The correlation between Enigma intelligence and operational outcomes was direct and measurable. In the Mediterranean theater, Rommel's Africa Corps suffered supply shortages directly attributable to ultra-intelligence that allowed British forces to intercept supply convoys. In 1941 and 1942, over 60% of supplies shipped to North Africa never arrived, sunk by submarines and aircraft positioned based on decrypted communications. Rommel himself recognized that his logistical difficulties were inexplicable, writing in his diary that British forces seemed to possess supernatural knowledge of his supply operations. The strategic deception campaign surrounding D-Day demonstrated Ultra's value in the opposite direction, confirming that German commanders believed false intelligence planted through double agents. When Enigma decrypts revealed that Wehrmacht units were reinforcing Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy, Allied planners knew their deception had succeeded. The ability to read enemy responses to friendly deception created a feedback loop of intelligence advantage unprecedented in military history. But the numbers, impressive as they are, capture only part of Ultra's significance. The transformation from cryptographic darkness to comprehensive intelligence represented a conceptual revolution in how wars are fought. For the first time in history, one side possessed near-complete knowledge of enemy intentions, capabilities, and operations while remaining opaque to that enemy. This information dominance changed military planning from educated guesswork based on incomplete intelligence to precise calculation based on comprehensive knowledge. The human cost of achieving this advantage extended beyond the casualties saved through better intelligence. Bletchley Park employed over 10,000 people at peak operations, working in shifts around the clock, maintaining security so rigorous that thousands carried secrets to their graves. The psychological burden of knowing that careless talk could cost thousands of lives, that every breach of security could alert Germans to Enigma compromise and close the intelligence window, created stress that many never fully processed, even decades after the war ended. The women who operated bombs and staffed the administrative functions that kept Bletchley Park operating faced particular challenges. Most were young, recruited directly from school or university, thrust into work of strategic importance without recognition or acknowledgement. They returned to post-war society, unable to explain what they had actually done, finding that vague descriptions of clerical work failed to capture years of intellectual contribution to victory. Some found post-war careers limited by inability to cite their actual wartime achievements. Others found that employers, skeptical that young women had done anything important during the war, dismissed their service as inconsequential. Not until declassification in the 1970s could these veterans speak openly about their contributions. By then, many of the key figures had died. Turing died in 1954, persecuted for his sexuality, his crucial contributions unknown to the public. Dilly Knox died in 1943 from cancer, having broken Italian naval Enigma but never knowing the full extent of Ultra's strategic impact. Hugh Alexander, Gordon Welchman, Joan Clark, and dozens of other brilliant minds worked in post-war obscurity, bound by the Official Secrets Act to silence about their greatest achievements. The recognition that finally came in the 1980s and 1990s, when historians pieced together the Ultra story from declassified documents and surviving testimony, was belated but profound. Britain confronted uncomfortable realities that it had persecuted and destroyed Alan Turing while he was alive, that it had allowed crucial contributors to die in obscurity, that it had denied recognition to thousands who had helped win the war through intellectual rather than martial contribution. The official apologies came slowly. In 2009, Prime Minister Gordon Brown issued a posthumous apology to Turing on behalf of the British government. In 2013, Queen Elizabeth II granted Turing a royal pardon. In 2017, the Alan Turing Law pardoned thousands of other men convicted under the same discriminatory legislation that had destroyed Turing. These acknowledgments, while important, could not reverse historical injustice or restore the years that Turing and others lost to persecution and secrecy. The technical legacy of breaking Enigma proved more immediately transformative than the personal recognition of those who achieved it. Turing's work on the bomb led directly to his post-war designs for stored program electronic computers. The ace design at the National Physical Laboratory, while never fully built to his specifications due to institutional obstacles, influenced computer development worldwide. The Manchester Mark I, built at Manchester University, where Turing worked from 1948 until his death, was among the first computers to execute stored programs, demonstrating that Turing's theoretical universal computing machine could exist in practical form. The principles established at Bletchley Park, that mechanical processes could perform logical operations faster and more accurately than human minds, became the foundation of computer science. Every modern computer, from smartphones to supercomputers, descends directly from concepts that Turing formalized in his 1936 paper on computable numbers and demonstrated practically in machines built to break German codes. The revolution that began with rotating drums, clicking through rotor configurations in a wooden hut in Buckinghamshire, now encompasses every aspect of modern civilization. Turing's theoretical work on artificial intelligence, particularly his 1950 paper proposing the Turing test for machine intelligence, emerged directly from wartime experience with machines that performed intellectual tasks. If the bomb could think through logical possibilities faster than human analysts, what other intellectual work might machines perform? This question, which seemed abstract and philosophical in 1950, became urgent and practical as computing power increased exponentially through subsequent decades. The institutional legacy of Bletchley Park evolved into the Government Communications Headquarters, GCHQ, Britain's signals intelligence agency that continues the work of intercepting and analyzing encrypted communications. The organizational model developed during the war, combining academic brilliance with industrial-scale operations, military discipline with intellectual creativity, became the template for signals intelligence agencies worldwide. The American National Security Agency, established in 1952, adopted approaches pioneered at Bletchley Park, recognizing that cryptanalysis in the modern era required mathematical capability combined with computational machinery. The educational impact of Bletchley Park's work emerged gradually as secrecy restrictions eased. The generation of mathematicians and cryptographers who worked there carried their knowledge into post-war academic positions, influencing curricula and research priorities without being able to explain the source of their insights. When declassification finally allowed open discussion, the story of breaking Enigma became a foundational case study in applied mathematics, demonstrating how theoretical insight can solve practical problems of existential importance. The philosophical implications of Turing's achievement extend beyond cryptography and computing. His demonstration that mechanical processes could defeat human secrecy, that logical analysis could overcome apparent complexity, that machines could perform intellectual work faster than minds, challenged fundamental assumptions about the uniqueness of human intelligence. This challenge, made concrete in the bomb and explored theoretically in Turing's post-war work, established the framework for ongoing debates about artificial intelligence, machine consciousness, and the relationship between human and mechanical capability. The economic impact of shortened war resists precise calculation, but certainly amounts to trillions of dollars and millions of lives when measured in avoided destruction, prevented casualties, and resources not consumed by additional years of conflict. Every month the war continued meant massive military expenditures, destroyed infrastructure, civilian deaths, and military casualties. If Ultra shortened the war by even 1 year, The return on investment from recruiting brilliant minds and building computational machinery justified the expense thousands of times over. The cryptographic lessons that breaking Enigma taught influenced post-war cipher design profoundly. Modern encryption systems recognize that complexity alone provides no security if the system contains structural vulnerabilities. The principle that any cipher must assume the enemy knows the algorithm, that security must reside in the key alone rather than in algorithmic secrecy, reflects lessons learned from Enigma's defeat. Contemporary cryptography accepts that given unlimited time and computing power, any cipher can be broken. The design goal is making that break require computational resources that render attacks impractical. The strategic lesson about the relationship between cryptographic security and operational procedures proved equally important. Enigma's mathematical structure was sound. The vulnerabilities that Turing exploited resulted from operational procedures that created patterns and from German overconfidence in technological complexity. Modern cryptographic practice emphasizes that secure systems require not just sound algorithms, but rigorous operational security, random key generation, unpredictable message formats, and constant vigilance against human errors that create exploitable patterns. The broader lesson about technological overconfidence resonates beyond cryptography. German cryptographers built an impressive machine and convinced themselves it was unbreakable because the mathematics appeared sound. They failed to consider that brilliant adversaries might find vulnerabilities invisible to the designers, that operational reality might differ from theoretical security, that human factors might undermine technological perfection. This failure of imagination, this inability to anticipate that the impossible might become possible if sufficiently motivated minds attacked the problem, represents a recurring pattern in technological development. Commander Denniston, standing in Hut 8 in March 1941, watching Turing's machine decode German naval communications in 18 minutes, witnessed more than the breaking of a cipher. He witnessed the moment when mathematical logic, embodied in mechanical form, proved that human ingenuity augmented by machinery could accomplish what human intellect alone could not. The transformation from believing that Enigma was mathematically unbreakable to watching it broken, routinely, mechanically, systematically, represented a conceptual shift as profound as any in human history. The code that German experts had declared secure for 150 trillion years was broken daily by a machine that clicked and whirred in a wooden hut, turning Hitler's secrets into Allied intelligence through relentless logical testing that no human could match for speed or accuracy. The mathematician who made this possible, who recognized that Enigma's complexity was also its vulnerability, who understood that mechanical logic could exploit what human intuition could not detect, died persecuted and unrecognized. But his legacy transformed civilization. From the bomb's rotating drums to the silicon processors in contemporary computers, from Turing's theoretical universal machine to the smartphones in billions of pockets, from the systematic defeat of German cryptography to modern artificial intelligence, the lineage runs unbroken. We live in a world that Turing helped create, using tools based on principles he pioneered, solving problems through computational methods he first demonstrated viable. The simple code that wasn't simple, the mechanical logic that defeated human secrecy, the stammering mathematician who changed history, all prove that the impossible becomes inevitable when brilliant minds refuse to accept conventional limitations. Alan Turing reduced 150 trillion years to 18 minutes through logical insight and mechanical implementation. That achievement saved hundreds of thousands of lives, shortened the war by years, preserved Britain's independence, and established the foundation for the computing age. The recognition came too late for Turing himself, but the revolution he began continues transforming human capability in ways that even he might not have imagined. The greatest revolutions often come from those who see problems differently, who refuse to accept that complexity equals security, who recognized that apparent impossibility often reflects failure of imagination rather than fundamental limitation. Turing possessed that revolutionary vision. He looked at Enigma and saw not an unbreakable cipher, but a logical structure with exploitable vulnerabilities. He looked at the impossible problem of testing 158 quintillion configurations and recognized that logical deduction could reduce it to a solvable challenge. He looked at the distinction between human and machine capability and recognized that machines could perform intellectual work that humans could not. That vision, applied to breaking German codes, won the war. Applied to computing machinery, it created the modern world. Applied to questions of intelligence and consciousness, it established frameworks for understanding minds and machines that remain central to philosophy and computer science. The simple insight that letters never encrypt as themselves, that logical contradictions reveal truth, that mechanical processes can embody mathematical logic, transformed from obscure observation into the key that unlocked Nazi Germany's deepest secrets and opened the door to the computing age. March 10, 1941. Hut 8, Bletchley Park. Commander Denniston watching a machine decode messages in 18 minutes that should have required 150 trillion years. Alan Turing explaining in his stammering manner that it was simple really, just logical certainty mechanically applied. The moment when impossible became inevitable, when mathematical insight defeated mechanical complexity, when the code that protected Nazi tyranny became as transparent as plain text. The revolution that saved Britain, shortened the war, and created the future, achieved by a mathematician who chained his coffee mug to a radiator and occasionally wore a gas mask while bicycling, who was persecuted for who he loved and died before the world recognized what he had accomplished. The code wasn't simple. The insight that broke it was simply extraordinary. The legacy transformed everything.